On 5 News tonight, grief turns to anger in Nice. Theresa May gets tough on Trident, and state-sponsored doping in Russian sport. In Nice, crowds who had gathered for a minute's silence erupted into angry jeers at the authorities they blame for not stopping last week's terror attack. As MPs prepare to vote on keeping Trident, Theresa May faces tough questions.
Is she personally prepared to authorise a nuclear strike that could kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children?
Yes.
The staggering extent of doping in Russian sport is revealed, and it's recommended that all the country's athletes are banned from the Olympics. Also tonight, is your summer holiday safe? After firm low-cost holidays went bust, thousands of British tourists have been left in the lurch. So what protection do you have if a holiday company goes under? And boys and girls enjoy playtime together, but is there a difference between them when it comes to learning language? Good evening, I'm Matt Barbet. Welcome to 5 News Tonight. It's been a day of high emotion in the French city of Nice as people gathered to honour the victims of last week's massacre. Thousands turned out on the Promenade des Anglais, where 84 people were killed while celebrating France's National Day. They'd come for a minute's silence, but as the French Prime Minister and other politicians arrived, many began to boo and shout in anger at their failure to stop another atrocity on the country's streets. From Nice, Julian Drucker reports.
As thousands packed the seafront to remember those killed in the carnage here, sadness and solemnity were to be expected. But when the French Prime Minister and other politicians arrived for a minute's silence, the mood turned to one of fury. Jeers from many mouths aimed at the ears of one man. Manuel Valls is accused by them and opposition politicians of failing to combat terrorism. That rage soon subsided for a brief moment as the country paused for 60 seconds. As this drone footage shows, Promenade des Anglais, where so many died, became a scene of respect. They sang the national anthem and then commemorated the national heroes.
This has been such a divisive memorial service, but that anger we've just seen has now been replaced by praise and powerful applause for the emergency workers here.
As Prime Minister Valls departed, some in the crowd called on him to resign.
Too much people not like this government and civil.
That was why there was the anger?
Yes.
The people are very sad because the politics, just after this problem, speak about the responsibility and don't think about the family.
But even the deputy mayor of this city says the French government failed to provide enough police for the Bastille night event. Rudy Salles told me he'd asked for the same number of officers that had patrolled the recent Euro 2016 games.
The government were saying, but you have the same police than the Euro. That's not right.
So you think the government failed on Thursday?
I think so. I think so, but we will know it. We want to have the truth.
And you can see why people are angry today.
Of course, because we are angry with them.
This was the bodybuilder behind the barbarism. Details about Mohamed Boulel continue to emerge. A prosecutor today said he was rapidly radicalised. At one of the spots his vehicle passed by, the mountains of flowers and messages continue to grow. Today, Milan came to leave her tribute. Her emotions too raw to come earlier, she said.
Today, it's like the death of a person of my family. That's the same.
Nice is almost as busy as it once was, but the anger and the questions about Bastille Day persist.
Julian, what's the latest there on the investigation into Mohamed Boulel?
Matt, a key detail from the Paris prosecutor this evening. He says that there is no proof that there was any direct link between the Nice attacker and the so-called Islamic State. He said that the attackers seemed to develop an interest in them fairly recently. His web history shows that, and that he told his close friends he'd grown a beard for religious reasons. We also now know that he conducted several scouting missions along the promenade here in an attempt to see what was going on. But it's as a result of this attack in France. In Britain, the new Home Secretary Amber Rudd says that all British spy agencies and police forces are now reviewing their security measures. Any police forces that have big events in their area are told to look and see whether those security measures are going to be enough. 84 victims here, though, Matt, and the Deputy Mayor of Nice told me he is hoping that some sort of permanent memorial can be built for them soon.
OK, Julian, many thanks indeed. I'm joined now in the studio by Bénédicte Pavio, UK correspondent for the news channel France 24. And Bénédicte, why are the French public so angry with the authorities?
Well, I think there's a particular situation in Nice, but you're right, that unlike the Charlie Hebdo attacks and murder of my journalist colleagues in January 2015, which was utter shock and then anger at what had happened, then unlike particularly the Bataclan, the multiple attacks on Paris last November, again, extraordinary solidarity around the world and shock, anger, but rallying, unity, political unity, unity of the reaction in France. This is very different. This is very raw. This is very shocking. It's on a beautiful seafront. 2 kilometres, known by tourists, adored also by French people, turned into a crime scene. So Valls got booed because it is felt very much by French people locally in Nice that, well, there were 30,000 people and they were not protected enough by the French police.
Well, quite. I mean, it's fair to say this is a part of the world that isn't overly enamoured with the people ruling France at the moment, governing France at the moment. But has this state of emergency that's been in place since the Bataclan attacks and others in Paris, has it made any difference at all?
Well, it has, because as in the UK, we don't hear about all the attacks, terrorist attacks that have been stopped. But when you say are not enamoured, you're being very British about it and very polite and diplomatic, which we hope Boris Johnson, as a Foreign Secretary, of course, will be. The point is that you have a socialist government, a president who is months away from a presidential election next May. He is personally terribly unpopular, down to 15% most of the time, record low. And you have the Front National, led by Marine Le Pen, that scores very well in that part of France. You have at least 100 or more youngsters from Nice who've gone out to Syria, possibly some of them who've returned. So frustration and political disunity months away. Some would say a politicisation of what is happening there. But above all, grief and a sentiment that France is at war with terrorists.
Bénédicte, many thanks indeed. Now, MPs from all sides have clashed in the House of Commons as they debate whether to renew the UK's nuclear deterrent. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, told the House it would be an act of gross irresponsibility to scrap Trident with the threat from North Korea and Russia growing. She also had no hesitation confirming she would fire a nuclear missile if she had to. As our political editor Andy Bell reports, though, the issue is dividing Labour.
For a new Prime Minister, along with the trappings of power, come the responsibilities. And there's none greater than the command of Britain's nuclear weapons. Today, in answer to a question, Theresa May said she was ready to use that terrifying power.
So can we cut to the chase? Is she personally prepared to authorise a nuclear strike that could kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children?
Yes. And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, the whole point of a deterrent is that our enemies need to know that we would be prepared to use it.
Tonight, MPs will vote on whether to build 4 new submarines which will be equipped with these, the missiles that can carry nuclear warheads. The subs will cost at least £31 billion. The argument is this is vital to ensure Britain's nuclear deterrent into the 2030s. But was this vote largely designed to embarrass Labour? The party leader made his lifelong opposition to nuclear weapons clear.
If we want a nuclear weapons-free world, this is an opportunity when we can start down that road and try and bring others with us, as has been achieved to some extent over the past few decades. Surely, Mr. Speaker, it's an effort we should try and make, rather than go down the road the government is suggesting for us this evening.
But Labour's official position is still to renew Trident, and MPs lined up to denounce their own leader.
Shadow Cabinet last Tuesday, there was an agreement that current party policy would be conveyed by the front bench. When will we hear it?
Last year, Party Conference voted overwhelmingly in favour of maintenance of the nuclear deterrent. Yeah. So why aren't we hearing a defence of the government's motion from the dispatch box now?
It remains steadfastly Labour Party policy to renew the deterrent while other countries have the capacity to threaten the United Kingdom.
Renewing Trident is a huge decision which comes at a huge cost, but it looks as if it will be settled in the next few hours.
Andy, has the debate taught us any more about our new Prime Minister?
Well, for a start, the Defence Secretary could have led this debate, but Theresa May chose to lead it herself because I think she wanted to show that she was in charge and that she was capable of taking these tough, not to say you might say appalling decisions. Also, it was a good means to embarrass the Labour Party, and clearly that happened as well because it showed up the divisions inside the party in Parliament. And there is, at the moment, a full-blown leadership contest going on with two candidates who are seeking to try and replace Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the party. So all of this is playing out. Meanwhile, we will have a vote in a couple of hours' time where it looks as if Britain will vote to go ahead and renew that nuclear deterrent at a great cost.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. Well, Theresa May has condemned a failed attempt by part of the Turkish military to overthrow the government there. At least 15,000 public officials have now either been arrested or suspended, while new footage has also emerged of the moment a helicopter gunship opened fire on the country's intelligence agency as security staff shot back. A warning that Catherine Jones' report contains footage that you may find distressing.
Turkish soldiers accused of attempting to overthrow their government are hustled into court as an angry crowd chants, "Bring back the death penalty." High-ranking officials have been paraded on TV, asked, "Are you happy that you failed?" In all, 7,500 alleged plotters from the military and the judiciary are now detained and 8,000 police officers removed from duty. The Turkish government has released footage of the coup attempt. Here, a rebel tank ploughs through motorway traffic. And here, forces loyal to the government attempt to shoot down a helicopter gunship that's firing at an official building. It's widely expected the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, will exploit this crisis to tighten his grip on power, an outcome the new Foreign Secretary cautioned against today.
I think it's very important, in view of the failed coup, that we see restraint and moderation on all sides, and that's what I'll be calling for.
Why do events in Turkey matter? Well, it's a vital transit route for global supplies of oil, gas and grain. The European Union's plan to limit migration depends on the deal struck with Turkey to send migrants back there. And its NATO membership makes Turkey a key base for America's nuclear arsenal and for bombers targeting ISIS.
The danger is that if Erdogan goes too far in his purge, this might lead to instability in Turkey in the long run because of the grievances that this purge will cause internally. And if Turkey is unstable, then of course this does not bode well for stability in Europe.
Travellers are advised to avoid public places in the major cities most affected by this weekend's violence. But the Foreign Office reports that resorts where many thousands of British families have holidays booked have been relatively unaffected by Turkey's turmoil. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
Now, scores of Russian athletes have been taking banned drugs for 5 years, all with the help of the country's government and even the Secret Service. Those are the findings of a new report into doping, which claims that samples are passed through secret holes in the walls of laboratories. Earlier on, I spoke to Michelle Varoken about this, the former head of the UK's Sport Anti-Doping Agency. I began by asking her if she was surprised by these latest findings.
Well, I think I'm more than surprised. I think this time I'm really shocked that the extent of the corruption of the anti-doping system has gone on, and the period of time it covers, you know, it's critical. There will be some hugely disappointed athletes who will now realise that they probably lost out on a medal going back so many years, and how that has really changed their lives going forward, but they can never get that performance back.
We'd already heard about Russian athletes doping, of course. This brings us almost up to date with Sochi. But it does sound like something out of the Cold War, with spies being involved and passing samples through holes in walls.
Well, certainly. I mean, what we heard of before is that the corruption was actually within an international sports federation, and that there was a process of being able to either delay or to cover up. But this certainly, where a country is actually hosting a major event, an Olympic Games, and also the report references some other major games that took place, and how it was possible for the samples belonging to Russian athletes to be communicated and to be interfered with, if you like, for the sealing system of the bottles that we all trust around the world to be compromised in order to replace the urine sample, so that it would be possible for the Russian athletes to be reported as negative doping tests rather than, as they should have been, positive doping tests, and dealt with appropriately.
Talking of being dealt with appropriately, Michelle, we'll wait to hear what kind of sanctions Russia will now face because of this. What do you think should happen?
Well, I would hope that international sports federations, and I would hope the International Olympic Committee would do the right thing. I mean, there has been such a corruption, such a compromise of the national anti-doping system, that in fairness to other athletes, these athletes should not be allowed to take part. This country must in some way be sanctioned for helping that corruption of the anti-doping system to happen. And I'm not naive enough to think that this isn't possible anywhere else in the world. What we do know is there are weaknesses in the anti-doping system. That doesn't mean to say we should give up on it, but we should be absolutely realistic about the fact that the anti-doping system is not always as fit for purpose as we like to imagine, that we should now be thinking about how we will make sure we can restore trust and confidence into the system each step of the way, and that no one part of the system is greater than the other, that everyone should collaborate on the accountability for drug-free sport.
Michelle, one final question. Russia hosts the other big sporting event in a couple of years in the World Cup. Should they now be stopped from doing that?
Well, I certainly think it raises huge questions for FIFA, but also before that, there's a European Olympic Games that may very well still go ahead in Russia. And what do we do? How do we actually make sure that that could happen? Because, sports do rely on the contribution of a country in hosting, but certainly the anti-doping system cannot be a part-time, system in somebody else's hands.
Should they host them, yes or no? What do you think?
I think no, but it's a matter for the International Sports Federation, really. OK,
Michelle, many thanks indeed. Still to come on 5 News Tonight. Thousands of British holidaymakers are hit by the collapse of a travel firm. We'll be asking, how safe is your summer getaway? And is there a gender gap when it comes to learning language? Hear more about those stories and others after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. Thousands of British holidaymakers are still waiting to hear if they'll be stranded abroad after the travel firm Low Cost Holidays went bust on Friday. 27,000 people are already out in resorts, and 110,000 more have bookings coming up. The firm's being accused of luring in even more people by promoting cut-price holiday sale the day before it went bust. Well, earlier on, I spoke to Sean Tipton from the Association of British Travel Agents, ABTA, and I started by asking him what he knew about the company before this all happened.
Low Cost Holidays was an ABTA member up until May 2013, and due to a couple of disputes we had, one about financial protection, we were trying to extend it to cover new business models such as their own, and also the fact that they wanted to avoid paying the charges they have to pay to be part of the Atoll scheme. The company relocated to Palma in Mallorca. Now, the CAA, who run the Atoll scheme, at that stage issued a warning to people saying, be careful if you're dealing with this company, because they're not covered by British legislation anymore. I think the problem is now that they've failed, it's become very clear that the protection they would have had if they'd stayed in the UK does not exist for their customers. So that there's going to be a lot of people, quite apart from losing holidays, will lose out financially as well.
So Low Cost Holidays already trying to lower their own costs prior to this. What do you make of them trying to sell very cheap holidays in the run-up to this latest news?
Companies will sell holidays up until the moment they cease trading, but it's obviously important at the same time that if they do so, that they sell at realistic prices. Now, if you are having problems paying your suppliers, then certainly at a directorial level, you'll be aware of the state of the company's finances. And it's not exactly the best thing to do to start offering massive discounts to holidaymakers when you know your company's in financial difficulties already. The problem we're also going to see, because they did live up to their name, Low Cost Holidays, a lot of the people who book with them are not necessarily people who are terribly well off. Many will have saved up for months, if not years, to pay for these holidays. And now having to rebook at short notice, it's going to be awkward for them to do that.
So what does it mean for those two groups, the people who are already away abroad with low-cost holidays and those who are about to go, maybe even just heading off to the airport now?
Well, the people who are actually abroad, mostly in Spain at the moment, will be OK. In the sense that they can come home, they'll have their airline tickets. The airlines won't argue about that. They'll let them come home. The problem they're going to have in most cases is that the hotels will not have been paid and will ask them to pay again. Now, if you're already on a budget, that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And the second problem is that the prices they would charge by low cost won't necessarily be the same as what the hotels owed. They might be asked to pay considerably more. Problems there for starters. People due to travel, those that have their airline tickets, again, they can use those, but they're going to have to rebook accommodation. And particularly in Spain, where demand is through the roof at the moment, those hotels will put those rooms back on the market very, very quickly. So people will need to rebook straight away. I would not delay on that.
What about people's travel insurance? Does it make a difference that this firm was not a member of yours or did not hold an Atoll licence?
In terms of financial protection, because people will have to pay again in many instances, it's not so much travel insurance as the issue here. They're not financially protected by ABTA or Atoll. They seem to possibly be protected through a Spanish scheme, but that's a bit vague. The main protection here will be for people who pay by credit card. You're covered under the Consumer Credit Act. They should go back to their credit card company. If you pay by debit card, go back to your bank. The protection there is not a legal requirement, but banks will often voluntarily refund.
Sean, many thanks indeed. The gunman who shot dead 3 officers in the state of Louisiana yesterday had made videos urging people to fight back at police because of their treatment of African-American people. One of his victims had just become a father for the first time and just days ago had written about how difficult it was to be a black officer in his home city. Dominic Reynolds has more.
Through fighting back, through bloodshed.
Gavin Long's videos didn't always make much sense. But what was clear was that he was angry. An Iraq veteran turned online lifestyle preacher, he murdered 3 police officers yesterday. His last videos appeared to anticipate that today people would be asking why.
They'll try to put you with ISIS or some other terrorist group or anything. No, I'm affiliated with the Spirit of Justice.
I don't know who this man is.
A passerby filmed as Gavin Long began to shoot at officers. And as more arrived, it became clear they'd been ambushed. After 8 minutes of shooting, Gavin Long was dead. So were Officer Matthew Gerald, Deputy Brad Garofalo, and Officer Montrell Jackson. Jackson had only posted days ago on Facebook about what it's like to be a black officer in the tent city of Baton Rouge. I love this city, he said, but I wonder if this city loves me. In uniform, I get nasty, hateful looks, and out of uniform, some consider me a threat. These are trying times. A fortnight ago, a black man in Baton Rouge was killed by white officers. There were protests, and at one in Dallas, 5 officers were shot dead. President Obama now faces a complex crisis of policing, guns, and race.
Nothing justifies violence against law enforcement. Attacks on police
are an attack on all of us and the rule of law that makes society possible.
A fourth officer is critically ill in hospital and colleagues are stationed outside. Those there to serve and protect, increasingly needing protection themselves. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News.
Now, boys are almost twice as likely as girls to fall behind in their language skills by the time they start at school. A study looking back over the last decade found there's an equivalent of 4 boys in every reception class who are falling short of what is expected of them. Layla Hayes has more details.
Each of these 5-year-olds, both girls and boys, are doing well at school. That's because at Duncan Primary in North London, they tailor the way they teach to meet the needs of every single child.
At this school, teachers deliberately choose topics such as superheroes or space to engage boys in learning, and they allow more outside physical play the boys particularly enjoy.
But today's report says across England, boys are failing to keep up, especially when it comes to language and communication. The report found a quarter of boys in England started reception class struggling to speak a full sentence or follow instructions, compared with 14% of girls. For disadvantaged pupils, the gap was even greater, with 38% of boys not meeting the standard, compared with 23% of girls. And those not reaching the expected level at age 5 were 4 times more likely to be lagging behind in reading by the end of primary school.
Those children who struggle with language are less likely to be able to read well at school. That then doesn't set them up well for going on to secondary school and being able to engage in all the subject matter at secondary school. They're less likely to then go on to university and therefore less likely to succeed in life.
The report said it wasn't clear whether the difference between boys and girls was biological or social, but the head of Duncan Primary says in his experience, boys aren't always behind.
Arriving in reception, the boys and girls are very much on a par, and if anything, the boys are probably a little bit more advanced. They're much more sociable, they want to interact, they want to play, they're all very excited to come to school, and we desperately don't want to stop that enthusiasm when they arrive.
All children have potential, and experts say with the right education, boys shouldn't be left behind. Layla Hayes, 5 News.